Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome back to the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. There is a lot going on in the NHL, full stop. And on today's show, Steele and I will be doing what we do and breaking down everything that you need to know, including Kevin Fiala signing with the LA Kings, lots of teams interested in Ville Husso, some rumors coming out of the Toronto Maple Leafs, but most importantly and most interestingly, what is going on with the New York Rangers, some Evgeni Malkin rumors. Pierre-Luc Dubois? Stay tuned and tap in. Let's break it all down.
You're Locked On Fantasy Hockey, your daily podcast on fantasy hockey. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, party people? And welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us and making us your first listen every single day. I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Mr. Steele Roden, recent graduate of the College of Sports Media in downtown Toronto, YouTube content creator extraordinaire. I myself, Mr. Big Flip Livingstone. You know where you can find my pieces of work, The Score, NHL.com, and a lot of other places. Make sure you also check us out across all platforms you find your favorite content, including YouTube. So go out there and smash that subscribe button. Steele and I appreciate that love. You know the drill. I'm saving all my ammunition today, Steele, for a lot that we have to talk about because this is what happens at this time of year. Rumors abound. This isn't the NBA. We're not getting too crazy, but things are happening. And, you know, on today's show, we're going to talk about Ville Husso, the Edmonton Oilers, and a lot of interest in him. We're going to talk about the LA Kings making a big move for Kevin Fiala and paying up for him. A little bit of rumors coming out of Toronto as well. But I think where we should start is with the New York Rangers. And, you know, earlier today, Elliotte Friedman was on a podcast, and he's mostly speculating. But when Elliotte Friedman speculates, we tend to talk about it. So when he mentions that the Rangers might be poking around at a guy like Evgeni Malkin, and there was also rumors earlier today they were checking in on Pierre-Luc Dubois, we know they have a little bit of cap space. This is some interesting stuff from the New York Rangers. And honestly, if they can add a piece like one of those two guys, look out.
Yeah, those are two huge names to throw out there for the New York Rangers, especially with the team and the arsenal they already have on their roster. They do have a couple of RFA guys like Capo Caco who are out there that need to be signed and who have been spoken about a lot recently. That him as well as Alexis Lafreniere are going to be top 6 forwards for the New York Rangers, so they're going to sign him. They have $11 million in cap space right now, but if they can go out and get a guy like Evgeni Malkin, who can bring a lot of leadership qualities to this team, as well as he's still a significant player in the game right now.
Yeah.
And then on the other end as well, Pierre-Luc Dubois, who's had his struggles so far with both of his teams, with the Columbus Blue Jackets and the Winnipeg Jets. That would be a great fit for the New York Rangers too, because it seems like with the Winnipeg Jets, they've got a ton of issues right now. They might be on the market shipping out Blake Wheeler. Dubois might be on the list too. So who knows? It's all just speculation right now, but those are two huge names to be talking about for the New York Rangers.
It is all speculation at this point, but usually sometimes where there's smoke, there's fire, especially with, we already know there's some issues going on in Winnipeg, and we know the Pittsburgh Penguins are going to have to make a decision here on where they allocate some of this money, and there's a lot of holes in that lineup, and they also definitely need to sign Casey DeSmith, because with Tristan Jarry in line for a major payday and only under contract for one more year, you need a contingency plan in net. We've seen it across the NHL. Good goalies are in need across the league. So they have some interesting maneuvers. We talked about them, but more interestingly, I think right now, the New York Rangers. And you mentioned some of those UFAs. Andrew Kopp is also a big one that they need to sign. Yeah. They mentioned earlier this week, I forget who picked it up, but Ryan Strome is at the top of their priority list as well. And you and I have talked a lot about the New York Rangers and the quality that we expect from them, and they were right there this year. They really were. And Igor Shesterkin and a couple of those pieces up front automatically make them a contender again, in my opinion, for next season. So if they can manage, and again, we've said this a number of times, big ifs in the offseason coming up for a number of these teams, and, free agency is looming. But the New York Rangers are another one of those teams on the hot seat, in my opinion, that, the win now mentality is very much real. And I know Igor Shesterkin and some of these pieces are younger, but they're that close, if you know what I mean, Steele. So I'm intrigued to see what happens with this, especially if they can even bring back, they need to bring back Andrew Copp after the good season he had. I think we can both agree there.
Yeah, I think that might be tough if they go after a guy like Evgeni Malkin, because again, this is on his side of things. Of course, he wants to stay in Pittsburgh, but he knows this is a business and he wants to be paid, and he's going to get the big bucks, especially with the season he just had, a point per game, 42 points in 41 games. So it might be difficult to get guys back like Andrew Copp and Ryan Strome if they want to look to test the waters a little bit and see who's in the free agent market.
Most definitely. And this is one of those things that as the summer continues to evolve, there is going to be a lot of juicy tidbits dropped. This is mostly speculation, but we will see and we will monitor this for you guys. Trust me. So don't miss any episodes. Keep it locked right here to the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. There's nothing much to bet on in the NHL world right now, but that won't be for very long. And trust me when I say I have a lot of bets up my sleeve. Steele's back in the lab already cooking up those futures bets. Trust me, we have a lot coming up. And we'll be making those bets on betonline.net. Your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest sports development, league reviews, and news, including everything from this year's Major League Baseball season. BetOnline is your continued source for all the info, live betting, esports, and scores that you need. It also remains the best spot for all of your podcasts and news this season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA and boxing. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and all the action. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Thank you for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Don't forget, we are free and available on all podcast platforms, which also includes YouTube. So please hit the subscribe, hit the follow button. Flip and I appreciate all the love and support out there. And thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. And this is a huge player in fantasy hockey right now. He was just paid the big bucks. He's going to have huge fantasy implications. I think he's actually going to get drafted a whole lot of the hell higher than he was last year. And let's talk about the Kevin Fiala trade. Minnesota Wild trade Kevin Fiala to the Los Angeles Kings. And, for me, looking at this trade, I love it from both sides. I think they got the very, very best out of Kevin Fiala. This is the highest career point season he's ever had in his career. Yep. He smoked it by a mile. He had 85 points this season. His previous career high was 54 back in the 2019 season. He's 25 years old right now. He's literally right in the middle of his prime. Yeah. And I think this was a great trade for the Minnesota Wild. Get as much out of Kevin Fiala as you can. Trade him off. Get the first round pick in this upcoming draft, the 19th overall pick, and Brock Faber, a defenseman as well, a Minnesota boy too. So for me, I'm loving it for both sides.
I can tell that you do have a little piece invested in the Minnesota Wild, and I appreciate that.
I do.
I appreciate that as much as it rattles me a bit as a Maple Leafs fan, but that's okay. That's called hedging your bets, and I appreciate that. And you know what? I think you're selling it a little bit hard on the Minnesota side of things, but there's something to be said about selling high on a guy who goes from 54 points to 85. Is he going to be able to replicate that, especially on a goal-strapped team like the LA Kings? So I see your point there because, yes, Minnesota did come off good from that perspective, 100%. And I do want to read this quote from Bill Guerin, the GM in Minnesota, who I absolutely love. He was a bull on the ice, and he's a bull in the front office. Quote, "To keep him, we would have had to trade 3 guys. It just didn't fit. So the fact that they did get, a second rounder in Faber, I believe he was a second rounder.
Second round.
And some pieces as well. Good for both sides. LA immediately signs him to a long-term deal because they need that depth up front. They're also very weak on the left side. Fiala does play both sides. I believe he can actually play a little bit up the middle too, but I might be dreaming. Anyway, he slots in probably on the top line. Like after Iafallo, and even that in LA isn't too great. Carl Grundstrom on the left side, like come on here. So if he can actually form some chemistry, though, Steele, on that second line with Phil Deneau and Trevor Moore,
I was thinking the same thing. And don't get me wrong. I think the LA Kings won this trade. I think this is better for the LA Kings. I just wanted to show it from a Minnesota perspective as well.
Of course.
Just getting him at his best and trading for him. And that's what Bill Guerin said. Like they couldn't afford him, so they had to trade him. But I really think that he would be phenomenal with Phillip Deneau and Trevor Moore.
Yeah.
Trevor Moore had a breakout season, finally cracking an NHL lineup, getting his opportunity with the LA Kings, and look what he was able to accomplish. I believe he finished the season with like 54 or 55 points on the season. Phillip Deneau, a great leader as well. I think Kevin Fiala is going to fit perfectly on that second line for the LA Kings.
Hey, the top line of Iafallo, Kopitar, and Kempe was, it was solid, and I don't see them breaking that up, even though, Kopitar had a great season and he's, getting up there in age. To confirm, Trevor Moore, 17 goals, 31 assists for 48 points.
48.
In 81 games as well, which is also impressive. But yeah, I think the takeaway here is also the Kings had to pay to get their man, right?
Yeah.
They needed to step up a little bit because I think we've mentioned a few times that there's some things to like about this LA Kings team. They have a deep talent pool. If Quinton Byfield can take a step forward next season, which it looked like he did a little bit last season, dealt with some injury issues, I think COVID as well, development. Anyway, Kopitar, Deneau, and Quinton Byfield as your 1, 2, 3 up the middle is pretty solid, and we'll see what happens in LA. But I think the takeaway here is what happens now with Minnie. There's some other moves in Minnesota that'll have to happen, so we'll keep an eye on that, Steele. And I don't know where you want to go next. Do you have another take here for this trade?
Yeah, I actually want to continue talking about the LA Kings because I think the next move is to lock up Adrian Kempe. He's an RFA this season as well. He's also 25 years old. Yeah. That's the next move for the LA Kings. Lock up Adrian Kempe because, again, he had another breakout season alongside Trevor Moore as well. They have $11 million in cap space. Yes. Alongside locking up Adrian Kempe, I think the next move is to get Drew Doughty some help on the left side defensively. To me, the defense right now, obviously Drew Doughty's not in the lineup because he's injured right now, but it's the offseason. So once he comes back, he's going to need some help. He's going to need a lot of help on the blue line for the LA Kings. I think locking up Adrian Kempe and signing a well-known defenseman on the younger side, obviously, that can help Drew Doughty. Those are the two next moves because I think they can really rely and continue to rely on Cal Peterson and Jonathan Quick in net. I don't think they have to make any moves right now. Both got, obviously, I think Jonathan Quick obviously had a better season this year than he did the last two seasons. Mm-hmm. Cal Peterson is 27 years old. He's still looking for that starting job. So I think he still has a lot to prove, but he can prove it in time. And I just think it's right now for the LA Kings, Kempe and a defenseman are the top priorities.
Hey, the LA Kings, went toe-to-toe with the Edmonton Oilers. And like you said, if maybe they had Kevin Fiala, if they have, another guy with Drew Doughty back in that lineup, Troy Stetcher was good. Sean Dursey was good, but both of them were overplayed because after that, the fact that Alex Edler is still in the league, I don't even know who Mikey Anderson is. So anyway, that's just an ignorant comment because we don't get to see a lot of the LA Kings, but my bad for the Kings fans out there. Steele, let's talk about Ville Husso. Is that where you want to go next?
Yeah, let's get into it. I think that's a great conversation to transition into. Ville Husso, obviously, he's on the market right now. He's testing the waters a little bit. And there's many teams out there that are interested in Ville Husso after the season he just had.
Look, he was shaky in the playoffs, but there's something also to be said about what we've seen from him in only 57 career regular season games. And, a 920 save percentage, 250 goals against. Those are numbers that are going to get you serious looks from a lot of teams in this league. And we know goaltending is so thin these days. And to hear that the Edmonton Oilers are at the top of that list of teams targeting Ville Husso, it would almost be concerning if you didn't hear that. If I didn't hear that the Edmonton Oilers were in on Ville Husso, I'd wonder why. Because I'm sure there is some serious looks going on at this goalie. He's also 6'3" Steele. There's no goaltending in sight in Edmonton. We talked about that, and we don't need to go back down this road. But with Jordan Binnington being under contract for 5 more years at $6 million, I really don't see Husso going back to the St. Louis Blues, in my opinion. And it kind of starts there for me. Like, I really do expect Ville Husso to be playing in another city come October.
Yeah, I expect the same thing. And, obviously the Edmonton Oilers are interested for a reason because they're in the goalie market. But I see this as it very unlikely to happen just because they only have $7.1 million in cap space. They've mentioned they obviously want Evander Kane back, but he's going to be getting towards north of $7 million, which it looks like after the season he just had. As well, if they were able to go after Ville Husso, I think they need to not jump it too quick. To me, looking at his previous seasons, not just in the NHL, but in the AHL and in Helsinki as well, this is pretty much the second best. This is his top season he's ever had, but he's only had one other season like this. And that was back in 2015 for Helsinki. He pretty much had the exact same record. I believe he was 25-8-6 at the time. But other than that, there's not been too much spectacular about him than those 2 seasons. I still think he's going to be a starting goaltender. I still think obviously the teams are interested for a reason after the season he just had. But I don't think teams need to be really careful about not overpaying this guy. I think they really need to look into this and make sure that they're paying him the right amount and not overpaying. Because it might not work out. We've seen, and if it doesn't work out, if Edmonton were to go out and get him and it doesn't work out, that's just another year or 2 years that you're wasting for Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl.
What you're saying is not wrong. Like, for sure, they definitely should. But unfortunately, well, maybe fortunately for the thin free agent goalie market, and guys like Jack Campbell, Darcy Kemper, and even Marc-Andre Fleury, that means, unfortunately, some teams might have to. But what you're saying is right. They really should see what's good with Ville Husso. Also, bringing up stats from 2015 from Helsinki, if that's what his agent has to work on, something tells me he's going to get laughed right out of the negotiating table. So that's another interesting point right there. But yeah, Marc-Andre Fleury, Darcy Kemper, Jack Campbell, those are the other names on the market. And the interesting thing about those guys, they're all 30 or over, and Husso has age on his side at 27.
Yeah.
So there might be some interesting teams willing to kind of, risk it all, if you will, on Husso, just because the options are so bare. The cupboard is bare, and that's clear. So, hey, this is one of those things that I think once one of those dominoes fall in net, I think immediately the other ones will follow.
Yeah.
I think, the first deal of either of those goalies, and we know those 4, like I said, Jack Campbell, Ville Husso, Darcy Kemper, and why am I pulling a blank on the last one?
Fleury.
Jack Campbell.
You said those Jack Campbell.
Sorry, Darcy Kemper, Marc-Andre Fleury. I'll be all right. Those 4 guys are for sure going to be the first 4 to go. And I really do think once one makes a move, the others will follow.
Yeah, we've seen that in the past, and I agree that's most likely what's going to happen. On top of the $7.1 million in cap space and the interest in Ville Husso, they have a ton of RFAs and UFAs as well. They have 7 UFAs, 3 RFAs, which I believe one of them is Jesse Puljujärvi. So that's someone that they want to lock up as well. They have we just talked about this the other day too. Ken Holland has a ton of work to do in the offseason. He's going to be a very, very busy man. And he's got to make sure that he makes the right moves because, even though they got to the conference finals, that's not the end game. They want to be lifting the Stanley Cup. We just said this the other episode. He's got to make the right moves and make sure that his top 2 superstars are happy with the direction that they're moving forward for their future.
Yes, sir. Think about if Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid were playing in the NBA right now, seeing the shots called by the players in the NBA when things don't go their way. I'm telling you, if those 2 guys were bowing out in the fashion that they were and those moves were happening in the NBA, McDavid's on the Lakers right now and Draisaitl's on the Nets or something. I don't know. But just seeing all this craziness in the NBA right now still makes me a little bit...
It is shocking. It
makes me a little bit jealous that the NHL is so tame. But then at the same time, maybe not, because it's just kind of tiring to hear these guys trade shots. Anyway, that's not what this show is about. But I think very quickly before we wrap up for today, and maybe it's a little bit of a selfish thing to talk about the Toronto Maple Leafs, but the first little bit of news out of Toronto, Ilya Mikheyev coming off a pretty good season. Well, his best yet, career highs in goals with 21 and points with 32. He's a sneaky little player, Steele. And I think the Leafs are one of those teams as well, shocker, who have an interesting offseason here to maneuver, especially because we know that they are cash strapped. Only $6.4 million in space. I don't know what you think about this because also he's a good penalty killer. And one of the things about the Leafs attack when it was working was it was a balanced one. And all of a sudden, if you're starting to lose pieces like Mikheyev, now all of a sudden your bite and your attack is a little bit less sharp.
Yeah, I believe the Toronto Maple Leafs and Edmonton Oilers are in the same boat right now. They're both looking to get two new goalies for this upcoming season.
What a tall task.
Yeah, it's a tall task to ask, especially with everyone on the market right now. Even Halak and Braden Holtby, they're in the 30s as well. So there's not a ton of options out there besides obviously Marc-Andre Fleury, Darcy Kemper, the guys that Flip mentioned. But they've only got $6.4 million to work with. We know that they still need some help on the back end. Ilya Mikheyev, the season that he just had, 32 points on the season, his best. He's looking for a payday as well, but unfortunately, they're not going to be able to afford him. And this is what happens when you're paying three guys over $10 million. And then, obviously William Nylander making just under $7 million. But it's very hard to have the flexibility you want when you're paying three guys over $10 million. It's very hard to do. And with the goalie market being so thin right now, and that being probably the hottest commodity over the last many years, the Leafs are in a tough boat. I believe the Edmonton Oilers and the Toronto Maple Leafs are in the exact same boat right now.
Steele, there is not much time left in this episode, but I'm going to hit you with two things super quick. The Leafs have maneuvered themselves into this situation, and now all of a sudden they are right up against it, and they don't have the luxury of any success in the previous seasons, which makes that intensity obviously right up at the top tier. And you and I haven't spoke about this yet, and we haven't even spoke about it off air, considering how much we talk about hockey off air. That's surprising. But I'm going to hit you with my take about this entire thing very quickly, and we'll wrap it at this, and let me know what you think about this. But what you just said about the overpaying of the players that they have, overpaying is my opinion. At what point is there accountability on the front office in the Toronto Maple Leafs, and the fact that after this season they got bounced in the first round, and I know it was closer, but they got bounced again in the first round, and there is no accountability anywhere. The same people come back. Kyle Dubas comes back. There's not even any conversation about it. And now all of a sudden, some of these moves are starting to really be put in the spotlight. And now we need two goalies and a D-man if Muzzin is all kinds of hurt. There's all kinds of things to look at here, Steele. And to me, if the last season wasn't the last for Kyle Dubas to show some success, this for sure is. Because like you just said, look at how he's maneuvered this team in this situation. I don't know how he gets out of this one. And if they get bounced in the first round again, Steele, in my opinion, Brendan Shanahan cannot come down to that podium and say, I stand by Kyle Dubas and he is back next year. That's my take on that.
For me, I don't think their name should have been mentioned at all this past season. I thought Kyle Dubas and Sheldon Keefe did an absolutely fantastic job with the management of their team, with the deadline acquisitions. I thought Kyle Dubas and Sheldon Keefe did a fantastic job. But I do agree with you that this is the final year and the final straw if they aren't able to get past the first round or even make a deep playoff run. There has to be some accountability in the front office, and it starts with Kyle Dubas. For me, I thought he's done a pretty damn good job.
This year was better for sure. This year was better for sure, and I'm not trying to bring Keefe into it. I'm just talking about Dubas because I agree 100%. I love the job that Keefe did, so I'm with you there.
So, with Kyle Dubas, I think it's the final year if it doesn't work out. Even with Sheldon Keefe, I believe it might be the final year. It has to be because we've seen many times, even this season, coaches being fired and then just hiring a coach that was just on another team. Like it's most likely going to happen. But that's just the scenario of the situation the Toronto Maple Leafs are in right now.
Yep, and we'll see how it all shakes out. Steele, Ilya Mikheyev being one of those pieces, probably the first to go. They're not going to be able to afford him. Someone's going to throw some money at him. He can do a little bit of everything. And the one thing I will say, though, is let's see how he looks playing on another team's bottom six, because he has the, benefit of being regularly in the mix with guys like Willie Nylander, Tavares, and others. And say what you will about Tavares or Willie's contract. Those guys all have offensive talent and obviously make Mikheyev better and open up the ice for him. So if he goes to a team that is not as loaded on offensive talent, let's see what he does there. That's what I would be interested in seeing, because as much as we're talking up Mikheyev, at times he can be an absolute ghost. So anyway, this isn't the Toronto Maple Leafs podcast. That's all I have to say for today, Steele. Why don't you take us away, pal?
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone out there for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts, which also includes YouTube. So please make sure you hit the subscribe and the follow button. Get all the latest episodes of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. When you do, it's free and available. You can find it Monday through Friday, 7 o'clock in the morning Eastern time. Thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode with Flip and I. Have a great day. Good luck with all your bets out there, and we shall see you back here again on Monday.
Peace.